Hi, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your horoscope for Aquarius and Aquarius rising for the entire year of 2020. Joining me today is astrologer Leisa Schaim. Hey, Leisa.
Hey, Chris.
And we're going to be looking at the next 12 months of your life and looking at the major astrological and planetary transits that are going to be taking place during that time. So this is my 11th horoscope in a row, and I'm losing my voice. So Lisa's graciously hopped in to help me out to get through the last two horoscopes for this year. So why don't we jump right into it?
Okay.
All right. And thanks everybody who's joining us in the live stream. I appreciate it. All right. So let's start with the month of January.
All right. So January has three big things happening in a row, and they're actually happening right now since we're recording just a little bit into January here, but they'll still be applicable for more than those few days. So right now on January 10th, which is when we're recording today, there is an eclipse in Cancer, and that is in your 6th whole sign house of health and work. Then today we also had Uranus station in Taurus at 2 degrees of Taurus, and that is happening in your 4th house of home and family. And then finally, on Sunday the 12th, there is a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in your 12th whole sign house of hidden places. So that's kind of the major lineups, just starting out the year with a bang, kind of. So the first of those three things, eclipses bring beginnings and endings with regard to the areas of life that they're touching for you. And so for you, well, for everyone, all of the eclipses for the past year or so have been happening across the Cancer-Capricorn axis. And so for you, that's the 6th house and 12th house. Now, we did have a Capricorn eclipse right before the month started, so that's kind of in effect too. So basically, the Cancer eclipse is work and health. It has to do with either health things that can come up around this time or proactive changes to your health routines. The 6th does have a lot to do with daily routines of how you get things done during the day. So that can pertain to exercise routines, nutrition, and things like that. Particularly in Cancer, since that is a sign more noted for like how you take care of yourself or others. So that's a major thing happening here. The axis that's being activated has the overlap of health matters, I would say, with the 12th house as well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I think one of the things we were talking about earlier was the balance between like work and rest as being a major emphasis of the 6th house, 12th house axis, and that would be a major theme for the Aquarius rising people at this time.
Yeah, definitely. Oftentimes when there are eclipses or major transits going across that 6th, 12th axis, there are questions that come up, even if you've thought about it before in your life, about how to rebalance the amount of work you do and getting adequate rest. And usually I would say it's, most people land more on the side of overwork or not really taking enough time for themselves to rest and have downtime to refresh themselves. And so that's kind of one of the major questions that's coming up for you at this time.
Right. So the other major stuff, so we're talking about the eclipse. So we just talked about the lunar eclipse. There was also a solar eclipse in Capricorn that happened 2 weeks earlier,
right?
Which would have been in the 12th house.
Yeah.
So that's activating the same axis. And then, of course, all of this is taking place within the larger backdrop of all of the Capricorn transits this year, where we can see in the chart for right now, or at least for today, this huge pileup of planets in Capricorn in the 12th house.
Yeah, so the 12th house does have to do with taking time apart from your everyday life, and sometimes because you need to, and sometimes because you want to. And so there can be a variety of specific circumstances surrounding that for different people, depending on your birth chart specific. So it won't be the same exact thing for everyone, but it's about retreating. Really, that's a good word for the 12th, because sometimes it's like things that take you in seclusion. Seclusion's another good word for the 12th house. Seclusion away from everyday life. And for some people, that's just periodic, while for others, there may be a needed reason for that, like you need to recuperate from something. The 12th can also be things like your subconscious. I have noticed sometimes when people have Saturn transits through the 12th house, if it's not like a concrete matter that's taking you away from everyday life, sometimes it's more like things in your subconscious become more activated, or you become more aware of, little things that skew your perspective at times. And it can be a time to work on that. There is still a year left of this transit, more or less, beginning in January, because the Saturn transit through Capricorn started in December 2017. And Pluto entered in 2008. So these are long-term transits. So with the Saturn, you are 2/3 of the way through already of this house. But, if you haven't gone into that, I find Saturn transits through the 8th or the 12th being good times for things like counseling or sort of reflective things around that.
Yeah, and the 12th house is one of the more challenging houses. It can also deal with people that you don't get along with very well, and Saturn going through that sign could have brought some obstacles or difficulties with that area of your life over the past couple of years since Saturn went in December of 2017. It can also be a house that has to do with just challenging things that come up in terms of health matters. I know a few Aquarius rising people that had some health stuff come up with some of the things taking place in Capricorn not too long ago. But the good news is that Jupiter is also moving through the sign of Capricorn this year, which should bring some relief and some rectification to issues that you may have experienced as Saturn has been transiting through that sign over the past 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. So that is a nice change compared to the last couple years of only having Saturn and Pluto there. So Jupiter joined it as of December 2019 to be there for a year until December 2020. So that should help things out a bit. I do find that's a more subtle transit. It should more intangibly help things out behind the scenes, but it might not be outwardly obvious in your life.
Sure. And the last topic to mention with the 12th house is traditionally like self-undoing, or ways in which a person may sometimes undermine themselves, even intentionally or even unintentionally, but sometimes intentionally, by doing things that are not productive or that can be self-destructive. And that's one of the challenges that's been going on with Saturn going through the 12th house for 2 years now. But that's another thing that hopefully there'll be brought a little bit more balance this year with Jupiter moving through that sign, especially later in the year once Jupiter stations direct or retrograde and stations direct at 2 different times later in the year.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that's a little bit of where I was going with that in terms of counseling. It doesn't have to be as formal as that, but basically just examining your own potential self-defeating activities or habits of mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about the eclipse. We've talked about all of the Capricorn transits. Did we spend enough time on the Uranus station? No, in Taurus?
No. So that's the last of the 3 to mention. So that did station today on the 10th. And so Uranus is transiting for approximately 7 years through your 4th house of home and family. And so Uranus transits tend to bring instability, unexpectedness, erratic behavior, and things like that. And so it initially entered in May of 2018, but it's only been there in full because it went back to Aries for a bit for just about a year now. So it's still quite early in the transit. And as it stations here in mid-January at 2.5 degrees of Taurus, stations just put an extra emphasis on whatever energy is happening with that planet. And so it intensifies it temporarily, basically. And so sometimes if something is going to arise rather than be in a background influence, this is when it happens. And so Uranus stations twice this year in January and August. This is the first out of 2. So it may be an accentuation of some unexpected change with regard to your living situation or with regard to something involving your parents or other family members. And that's particularly true if you have any placements, particularly around 2-ish degrees in Taurus, but also to some extent around that degree range in Aquarius, in Scorpio, or Leo.
Right. So the Uranus transit itself is about a long-term period of major changes and somewhat rapid changes with respect to the home and living situation, or with respect to the parents or your relationship with them. For people that have placements in early fixed signs, this is going to be more pressing for you earlier on in the transit. Whereas if you don't have fixed placements or like your ascendant or IC degree until later in Taurus, it may not be as intense for you now, but it may be building up to that point later on. But if you do have any fixed placements around 2 degrees of Taurus, then you're probably really feeling this placement now.
Yeah. And so that can bring change, and sometimes unexpectedly so. That is the nature of Uranus transits. But sometimes it can look not really like what you want initially, but it can sometimes be for the best towards the end of the transit as it sort of breaks you out of ruts. Taurus is known for wanting stability in particular of all the fixed signs, I would say, even though all of them do to some extent. Taurus is a fixed earth sign, and so it really wants things to stay the same. And so it's a little bit of an unusual transit having Uranus go through there, because it's breaking up things that had been potentially pretty stable up until this point, but it still can bring new and innovative things to that area of your life that you didn't know you wanted, or perhaps you didn't want initially, but become something useful for you later.
Sure. So there'll be 2 periods of intensification of this transit this year when it stations twice. One of them is in January that we're going through right now as we're recording this, and there'll be another later in the year when it stations retrograde at 10 degrees of Taurus. So we'll return back to this transit later. All right, I think that does it for January. Let's move on to the month of February.
Okay. So 2 things that are notable in February. The first is that Mars moves into Capricorn mid-month around February 16th. And that means that joins that Capricorn party stellium in your 12th house. So then it's going to be Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all transiting your 12th house of hidden things. So that's a lot. I mean, that's going to be true for all of us. It just depends on which area of our life it's touching. So you are in good company. But Mars moving into your 12th can temporarily make you, I would say the Sun or Mars moving into the 12th can temporarily make you sort of hibernate, or at least to whatever extent is practically possible for you to sort of take action more behind the scenes rather than be more overtly out in the public. You may still need to, of course, continue your regular daily activities, but to some extent, at least, it puts more attention and your efforts on behind the scenes activities. And that can still be concrete things that just happen to be more behind the scenes, or it can be more in those other realms we were talking about, like going to places that are more secluded, like which can be, places like hospitals or retreat centers. It can be that you feel more mentally agitated sometimes when Mars goes through the 12th, but in a way that you're not necessarily fully conscious of, I think.
Sure. Yeah, there's often a greater potential for like conflicts with people you don't get along with when Mars transits through the 12th. It can be a period also of lower vitality or lower energy as it's going through that sign, because it tends to be one of the more low energy signs, whereas Mars tends to represent like energy and vitality. What are some other things?
Yeah, I think those are a lot of the main things. Basically, it's not a great time to make, major acts of self-assertion that you might need to do. You might wait for that, because when Mars is transiting your 12th, it's more like your efforts aren't out in the world. They're just kind of hidden right now. And so it kind of makes it harder for you to do that if you need to do that at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So that transit's actually beginning weirdly the same day that Mercury stations retrograde for the first of 3 retrograde periods that Mercury will have in 2020. And this one is stationing retrograde in Pisces, conjunct Neptune in the 2nd house of finances for those with Aquarius rising.
So the Neptune transit, we're not going to talk a lot about that because it's not doing a lot on its own this year in terms of interacting with the other planets, but it's a longer term transit, about a 14-year transit through Pisces. And it's in the mid degrees now. And so that brings some nebulousness potentially to the area for you with Aquarius rising, to your Pisces 2nd house, which has to do with your income, your financial matters, how you manage your money, that kind of thing, and your possessions. So any sort of background nebulousness that is happening for you in that area, the Mercury retrograde could particularly touch off, since it's one of the few things that will interact more strongly with Neptune this year. So Mercury retrogrades have to do with reviewing something, going back over. They can also have to do with temporary miscommunications, things of that nature, or things, mechanical things breaking down. So as it retrogrades through your 2nd house, there could be some sort of miscommunication or some other that snafu type thing coming up with, particularly with regard to your finances. It's not necessarily like a major transit, but it's something to be aware of at that time.
Yeah, especially towards the beginning of the retrograde, in the middle of February. Just be careful about the potential for miscommunication, or even in the worst case scenario, like deceit involving financial matters and involving your money or possessions to a lesser extent.
Right.
Just because a Mercury retrograde already has that potential for miscommunication and having to go back and relook at something again that wasn't communicated clearly. But when you combine that with Neptune, it just amplifies that potential quite a bit.
Definitely. So that's something to be aware of. Then towards the end of its retrograde, it does actually go back to about 28 degrees of Aquarius. So that does station direct then in your 1st house of self. So that won't necessarily be connected areas for all of you. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what that would even be if it was connected rather than two disparate things.
Yeah, it looks like it goes back into Aquarius, into the first house of self and mind and body on the 4th of March. And then it stations direct in Aquarius on the 9th of March.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was connected, it could be something about in reorganizing your or relooking at your financial situation, that it also leads you to reassess your sense of self and like who you are and what you're doing in the world, or how you put yourself forward in the world. And there may be some connection between those two that's kind of either obscure or somewhat straightforward to you personally, that could tie them together and make them more relevant at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And however this comes about, it is actually almost like a tiny preview of more important influences that will happen later in the month, or starting later in the month.
Yes, definitely. Because for some reason, the Mercury retrograde, which stations direct in Aquarius in the first house of self, and brings maybe those themes of having to find your own voice, or having to reanalyze like who you are and how you perceive yourself, as well as how others perceive you in the world. For some reason, that cues up some major like long-term transits that start in the same sector of the chart later in March, especially starting on the 21st, when Saturn itself moves into Aquarius and moves into your first house for the first time in almost 30 years. And then just a week later, Mars similarly ingresses into Aquarius, also moving into your first house, where it very quickly forms a conjunction with Saturn in the first degree of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that Saturn transit will be a long-term thing that's good to be aware of. And Saturn transits are normally 2.5 to 3 years through each sign. So it's a longer-term transit that will mostly take place starting in December of this year. But this spring, from late March to July 1st, there's a little bit of a preview of this transit for you, for all of us. And so it'll just go into the first 2 degrees of Aquarius. But in doing so, it will give you a sense of what this transit, larger transit, will be about when it returns again at the end of the year. And for you, I guess one thing we didn't mention about the Capricorn transits through your 12th house is that one other thing that can be is about endings. It's not all of the time that, but sometimes the 12th house can be, particularly because it comes right before the first house of self. And so sometimes there's like a whole cycle of things happening where you get to the last house, the 12th house, before you enter your first house again of self, and you kind of sweep out some things before you start anew with something.
Yeah, so this is really the beginning of a new 30-year cycle of Saturn through the 12 houses of your chart, as soon as it dips into your first house here. But this is just kind of a preview, because Saturn is just going to sort of dip its toe into the first house between late March, and then it'll retrograde out by the beginning of July, and it won't come back finally, or won't come back permanently for its full transit through that sign until later in December.
Right.
So Saturn in the first house, that's going to be a 2 or 3 year transit. The first house represents, as we've said before, like the sense of self, but also the body and physical vitality, as well as the mind and character, including things about your appearance. So it could be a period of reorganization or restructuring when it comes to that area of your life.
Mm-hmm. I always think Saturn transits through the first house are secondary only to Saturn returns in terms of the major emphasis of Saturn in your life during that time. It can have a crossover kind of similar feel, which is just majorly restructuring your life as a whole and re-envisioning what you are wanting to do or needing to do in some respects. Oftentimes Saturn going through the first is taking on new responsibilities, or conversely leaving something that's old, because you're restructuring for a whole new cycle. Sometimes it is a renewed focus on body or health matters, either attending to health matters that do crop up at this time, or being proactive about taking better care of your health. Because one of the things that Saturn governs is the passage of time and the limitations of the material world. And so for that reason, it can be just like, oh, bodies are finite, we should take good care of them so that they serve us well for years to come.
Yeah, and that brings up also like themes of like aging and reaching an important turning point in one's life in terms of reaching a new age, and some of the attendant things that come along with that, both physically as well as like mentally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. And sometimes that can be specific things that are visible, since this can be your appearance as well. Like I think losing your hair or things like that can sometimes be Saturn transits affecting the first house of the appearance. Sometimes other times it can be like, taking up exercise routines that slowly change your appearance, because Saturn also is things that take time, not things usually that are quick.
Yeah, one of the things that we should say, though, is that because this long-term Saturn transit, which is going to last for 2 to 3 years, it starts with Mars moving into Aquarius at the same time. That does have the potential, whether for those with day charts or those with night charts, for it kind of to start with raising some sort of initial obstacle or even a difficulty or even potentially like a crisis with respect to first house matters that then has to be dealt with or has to be addressed over the course of the next month or so, as both Mars and Saturn are moving through that sign. And I think that's especially the case for those that have early degrees of Aquarius or fixed sign placements around where that conjunction will take place around 0 degrees of Aquarius. But perhaps, even later, since then Mars will be transiting through that sign for the next month.
Definitely. Yeah. So while it is true, like we were talking about, that this will be a preview of the later transit when Saturn returns to Aquarius in December for a longer while, this will be a harder initial foray into that new area for you. And again, that's true for everyone. It's just sort of more focal to you because Mars and Saturn are ingressing into your first house of self. So, wherever we have Aquarius with that first ingress, Mars and Saturn within a few days of each other. So it is kind of an initial like, oh, this is an area you need to pay attention to right now with the Mars, because Mars can be more, Saturn is slow moving influences. Mars is more quick, headstrong, sort of urgent, not always urgent, but yeah, it could be for some people. So anyway, but it won't be like that later. So I do want to preface that, it'll show you the area or some of the themes that arise that you will focus on for a longer time later on. But the initial part in the spring here will be more of like a potential problem or issue arising, whereas later on it might be more long-term work that you can do less urgently.
Right, because one of the things you really focus on is that Jupiter is going to go into Aquarius with Saturn in December, which will bring a little bit more balance and a little bit more optimism compared to the initial Mars-Saturn ingress in March, which is a little bit more tumultuous or potentially tense.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, so that transit really just begins at the end of March, but it carries through into April and lasts for the entirety of April. There's only one major thing in terms of outer planets that happens in April, and that's the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction on the 4th of the month.
So Jupiter and Pluto have been transiting your 12th house. And again, this is a little bit more of an obscure area to watch this happen. I mean, I think for everyone, since all of those transits have been happening in Capricorn, Capricorn does have a very sober feel, planning for the long term and, kind of getting your act together, taking care of business and things like that. So I do think that's a general theme for everyone, no matter where those transits are happening. So you could still be feeling that, even though they are in this more obscure area of your chart. But that said, I mean, the Pluto transit has been going through Capricorn since 2008 in your 12th house of hidden matters. So whatever that's been doing, is a kind of a long, subtle, but like slowly, inexorably, like changing something about something behind the scenes for you, about, work that you do behind the scenes, potentially to things in terms of mental health. Jupiter is going to come along and expand that. And so Saturn's kind of temporarily out of the picture just for a few months. It will come back. But when Jupiter and Pluto get together, whatever you've been trying to transform in that area of your life and change over the long haul, Jupiter's going to give it a bigger push, a push to expand, a push to make it better, opportunities around that, and so forth.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest potentials is smoothing things out with like just Jupiter moving through the 12th house during this few month period and Saturn and Mars no longer being there is the potential for rectifying or smoothing over some relationships with people that you don't get along with in your life, to the extent of potentially even having some benefits from that area of your life if you're able to bring sort of peace to that area as opposed to maybe some discord or some challenges that you've been experiencing up to this point. It's also a good period maybe to work on mental health issues, as you were talking about, and maybe rectify some issues where one had been undermining themselves, but in putting some more effort into that area, you might be able to be successful in coming to terms with some specific issues.
Definitely.
All right. I think that takes us then into May.
Okay. Yeah, late April, the only other thing is that Pluto stations, which really just echoes the same thing we were just talking about, accentuating that.
Yeah, just an intensification of the Jupiter transits. All right. So once we get into May, the first major thing that happens is that Saturn stations retrograde in Aquarius. So this is the first station of Saturn in Aquarius and the first intensification of that transit, where whatever that transit is going to be about, this is the point where you fully will start feeling it. And what's interesting is just a couple days later, Mars actually departs from Aquarius and it moves into Pisces, which is the second house of finances. So it departs from the first house of self and mind and body and moves into the second house. So, yeah, this is going to have important ramifications for both people with day charts and night charts, just in terms of really getting a sense for what that long-term Saturn transit is going to be about for the next 3 years. But also, thankfully, especially for the people with day charts, removing the more irritating side of it, and potentially the more tense side with Mars finally departing from that sign.
Definitely. So yeah, like you said, with Saturn stationing there, it's kind of the only time it stations before it goes back into Capricorn and, finishes out that transit for the rest of the year until December. And so it just puts a little bit of a temporary exclamation point on whatever issues have arisen at this by this point in those few months that it's been in your first house of self. Gives you a sense of, okay, bookmarking that, I need to work on that later. If it is something that can wait or is a long-term thing, which it may well be, given that Saturn transits are often about things that are long-term. So that's the first thing that happens there. And then, as you said, Mars departs the first house of self for the second house of income. The major thing that happens right there in the second week is the Venus retrograde starts. So that's going to start in Gemini, and it's going to station retrograde in your fifth house, which has to do with children, things you do for fun, creative expression, sexuality goes there. So any casual dating goes there. So Venus stationing retrograde, Venus retrogrades in a general sense are often known for bringing people back from the past, particularly like past friends or romantic partners. And it's not always, the reason is not always to bring them back so that you can you can reconnect, but it's not always because you're supposed to get back together. That's always a good caveat to be aware of. And particularly so because Venus is stationing retrograde this time exactly square Neptune, which does have that nebulous sort of illusory effect. And so it can either look more positive than is really the case in reality. Like someone can come back from your past and you can be kind of blown over and be like, oh, we're supposed to get back together. This is made to be, meant to be. Or, conversely, someone can go back and you can think more ill of them than is realistically the case, because Neptune just kind of skews your perception oftentimes. Although I would say more of the time it tends to go for most people in the rose-colored glasses kind of way. But Venus retrogrades, it can be fine to reconnect, because the idea is to sort of revisit something, but then it's going to station direct later. And so the reviewing part comes during the retrograde. But when it stations direct and then goes forward again, which is going to be in June, then you can sort of more realistically assess, is this something that I'm supposed to reincorporate into my life, or someone I'm supposed to reconnect with for longer? Or is it really just hi, it's nice to see you again. Okay, we're good,
Right. So yeah, that whole Venus retrograde that starts in the middle of May and lasts through June, through the end of June, it should just be a period of reviewing and revisiting some things that have been established in terms of either your children or in terms of creative self-expression or in terms of sex and sexuality. In order to get a preview of what this might be about, you can think back to 8 years earlier, the last time we had a Venus retrograde in Gemini, around the same time of the year, and that could give you some idea, some topics that might be activated in your life or some themes that might arise that are connected with your specific birth chart. The Mars transit that starts at the same time, we should go back really quickly and just mention, because that does begin a 1-month period in terms of Mars perhaps putting greater focus and forcing you to put greater energy towards the area of finances and towards whatever it is that you do to make money. It can also be sometimes a period in which there's more tension surrounding financial matters, or even sometimes where conflicts or like strife can come up in that area of your life.
Yeah, definitely. And particularly if you're born during the day, there are more tensions around that. When Mars transits your second house of income for about 6 weeks, it can be a time where you have greater expenditures come up because you have to replace one of your possessions. For some reason, more money is going out than is coming in. It's that kind of transit. Or you could lose money in some way. But whereas if you're born at night, the Mars transit through the second is often more of just a focus or putting efforts towards making money at that time or something like that. But either way, you'll be putting more efforts in that area from that point forward for about 6 weeks.
Okay. I think that takes us then into the astrology of June, where we enter into eclipse season right off the top of the month.
Yeah, so there's a few eclipses here coming up this summer. And while we've been in for about a year now, the eclipse axis of Cancer Capricorn, and those have been going across your 6th and 12th houses, this is the first one that kind of edges in and gives you not a preview per se, this is a real eclipse, but it just starts off the eclipse series of Sagittarius and Gemini that's going to be in full force starting at the end of the year. So this is the very first one. We're only going to get a Sagittarius one this time of that series. And so the eclipses can often bring important endings and beginnings with regard to the areas of life that they're happening in. And for you with Aquarius rising, that's going to be in your 11th house of friends and groups and your larger social sphere.
Yeah, so it could indicate some sort of, certainly there's a shift that's going to happen over the course of the next year where for some reason the topics in your life are going to shift more towards friends and groups, and that becoming a more important or pivotal area of your life than normal. But also the 5th house eventually, which has to do with children, self-expression, creativity, or sexuality. So it starts with this eclipse here, the Sagittarius eclipse, which could indicate some sort of culmination of events with respect to the role that friends play in your life at this time. And it's interesting, this is like right in the middle of the Venus retrograde, which it reaches its middle point about 2 days earlier on the 3rd of June in the opposing house, in the 5th house. So there may be some sort of connection there.
Yeah, for sure. So that's the first of a few eclipses this summer here. Later in the month, there's going to be a Cancer eclipse on June 21st in your 6th house again of health and work. And right before that, we have a Mercury retrograde start in Cancer as well. So Mercury retrogrades, of course, again, are about reviewing, particularly reviewing communications, but also just going back over things in general, wherever it's falling. And so for you, that is the 6th house of work and health, people who either work with you, coworkers or employees, if you have employees. You could be revisiting some topics around that, reviewing arrangements, basically. Is this arrangement working out? It's a good time to review that if you have any sort of work connections with that, with respect to other people like that. And then the eclipse is another kind of new start within that eclipse series that we've been having. And this is the last eclipse in Cancer. So we've been having them for about a year or so now, and this is the last one in that series to kind of really activate your 6th house of health and work.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about this eclipse is just a few days earlier, the second Mercury retrograde period of the year begins, and it also happens in the sign of Cancer as well. So that starts on the 18th of June when Mercury goes retrograde in Cancer in your 6th house of health and work. So there may be some sort of focus on going back and rethinking or revisiting things that were established in that area of your life previously, either with respect to health matters or with respect to your job, that ends up having a much longer term impact than it might seem at first as a result of the eclipse that begins then just a few days later.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of synergy going on between this particular Mercury retrograde, since it both begins and ends in your 6th house of work and health, and the eclipse happening right around there too.
Right. So then later in the month, on the 25th, the Venus retrograde is over. That goes direct on the 25th of June. And then the last major thing that happens this month is that Mars ingresses into Aries on the 27th of June, which is important and notable because this is the sign that it's going to go retrograde in starting in September.
Yeah, so we don't normally mark every single Mars transit with a year overview, but this one is actually more notable than usual because it's going to be spending 6 months there instead of its usual 6 weeks. So that's quite a bit longer than for the planet of effort and tensions and things like that, action to be going into one area of your life. And usually you kind of Mars transits are like, okay, I got to do this in this area. Okay, I'm done. And then you move on to the next area. But here it's going to take much longer. And it's also with the retrograde later, starting in September, you're going to have to go back over some things that you initially do or decide in this area. It's not going to be a straight shot. And so that's good to know ahead of time. This is not the point in which you need to worry about that exactly when it first enters. But one thing it is good to know ahead of time is that there will be a retrograde. And one of the things about Mars retrogrades in particular is since Mars can be part of how we feel energy in our lives, when it slows down to retrograde, which it will be for a while, even before the actual retrograde itself, you can kind of start feeling less energetic. You can feel more lethargic. You might still need to put efforts towards something in this area, but you can't find the drive to do it. And so it's good to kind of pace yourself because Mars doesn't usually want to do that.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be more of a focus during this 6-month period on communication and communications ramping up and intensifying. You'll have to be a little bit careful because this could indicate a period in which you're more prone to aggressive communication or even getting into verbal fights or sort of altercations with people. It can also be a period in which travel is somehow more important or more of a focus, especially short distance travel like driving. But also it's a period in which you want to be extra careful not to do anything impetuous in terms of that or anything risky or dangerous, because sometimes like a Mars transit through the third could indicate like getting into an accident or something like that.
Definitely.
Third house is also siblings.
Yeah, siblings. So, with Mars going through your third, you might, on the one hand, need to put more energy towards something involving a sibling. Either they're going through something or you need to deal with something involving your relationship, like you're getting into conflict with a sibling at that time, or tensions are at least rising or something like that. But just be careful in how you deal with it because Mars is not a particularly careful planet. It's more about like, let's do this. And so you might need to put effort there, but you also just kind of want to, not be too aggressive when you do so, however that arises.
Sure. So that transit begins at the end of June and that takes us into July.
And I just also wanted to mention neighbors. We didn't throw that in there. Third house is also neighbors or your immediate neighborhood. So the same thing that we were saying about siblings could also apply to interactions with neighbors.
Yeah, or even extended family or other relatives outside of your immediate family unit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so July. So July starts with Saturn moving back into Capricorn for its last foray through your 12th house until December. So Saturn is no longer focusing its kind of serious-minded efforts towards the house of yourself and body and mind, but instead it's moving back into that obscure area of your 12th house. So Saturn's moving back into putting efforts and examining your subconscious, potentially mental health things, working on things involving people at cross purposes to you, who you don't normally get along with, that sort of thing. Jupiter's still going to be there all year until December too, so that's still helping out. But just know that initial foray of Saturn into your first house of self, that just gave you the preview. Saturn's now moving back, and then it'll be back in December.
Yeah, so this is the final, and there's also a solar eclipse that happens just a few days later in Capricorn, and that's also the final eclipse to take place that sign. So that whole balance of like work versus rest, as well as dealing with health issues, whether those are like physical health issues or mental health issues, and coming back and revisiting this part of your life in order to see what changes have been made over the course of the past 2.5 years or up to 3 years at this point almost, and finishing up the last of those changes and those restructurings and laying the foundations so that you can then move forward by the end of the year, by December.
Yeah, so there's a renewed Capricorn emphasis in the beginning of July. And then, let's see, what do we have later in the month? Let me put the calendar back up.
I mean, that's pretty much it for July. It's just that the Mercury station's direct in the 6th house.
Yeah.
So again, it's like emphasizing that 6th house, 12th house axis, which is like work and health.
Yeah. So those are the main themes there. 6th and 12th house for July.
Okay. That's going to take us forward into August. Whatever.
Yeah. So August, even though there looks on the calendar like there's a lot going on, the main actual theme is going to be that Uranus station on August 15th. in Taurus in your fourth house of home and family. And this is the farthest it's getting through Taurus this year, between 10 and 11 degrees of Taurus. And so this is one of the two times that it temporarily emphasizes that feeling or those things coming up around unexpected events or change with regard to home and family life. That can be changing where you live unexpectedly. That can be something arising with family members, particularly parents, if they are still around. So that is the second time this happens this year, of January and August. And this will also be more the case for you at this point if you have important placements around 10 or 11 degrees of Taurus, and to some extent any of the other fixed signs, so around 10 to 11 degrees of Aquarius, Scorpio, or Leo.
Yeah, so this is the first time that Uranus has gotten this far into Taurus, where it gets to 10 degrees. How far did it get last time? To like 6 or 8 or something?
So about 6.
I want to say 6. So
Yeah,
it's getting
6.
like really far into Taurus at this point. So if you have any personal planets around 10 degrees of the fixed signs, you're really going to start feeling this Uranus transit. And while there may have been some events that preceded this in terms of your fourth house, Uranus's tendency to import excitement, but also rapid changes and sometimes a sense of like instability is really going to start hitting a peak around this time in mid-August. If you have anything at 10 Taurus especially, but also 10 Leo, 10 Scorpio, or 10 Aquarius.
Yeah, so the other things that you saw on the calendar are just kind of more quick temporary transits. So that's kind of the main theme to look over for August here.
Okay. All right. That will then take us into September.
September has a lot of the main action going on here because September is actually the month that Mars does go retrograde. So September 9th is the day that Mars stations to go retrograde. And so it's been in there for a bit, since the end of June. You've already seen by this point in the year whatever is arising, like whatever will be arising for you in terms of what you need to put effort towards, what is coming up in terms of potential tensions and things like that with regard to third house matters. So, things involving your siblings or your relationship with other relatives or neighbors, or things involving how you get around town, like your transportation, issues arising with that. So Mars stationing retrograde is the pivot point in time where you thought you were kind of going along and doing what you needed to do in that area. And now something comes up where you have to go back over your previous efforts and review and potentially change course, reroute, and that sort of thing in order to move forward then later in the year.
Yeah, so I'm just moving this forward to see the exact degrees involved, because Mars actually stations retrograde at 28 degrees of Aries. And one of the things that's notable is that it's pretty closely squaring Saturn around that time, which is at 25 degrees of Capricorn by mid-September. So this may be creating some sort of conflict between your third house of communication and your 12th house of enemies. So you might want to be careful about, getting into like a verbal altercation with somebody that like makes them an enemy or creates a worse situation in terms of that than what you had previously.
Yeah, and similarly, just kind of echoing the same theme that you said earlier about being more careful at this time regarding, perhaps driving around town and things like that, and not taking unnecessary risks, because since this is the third house of how you get around town, and then it's squaring Saturn in one of the health houses, you just want to be more careful that doesn't turn into a problem.
Yeah. Also just be careful about other like tensions involving siblings or tensions involving neighbors or other extended relatives. This is definitely the most intense part of the Mars retrograde transit when it first stations retrograde in the middle of September. So that's the period, especially for those with day charts, when you would expect to see the most tensions potentially, especially if you have placements in the later degrees of the cardinal signs.
Yeah, definitely. So this will go through mid-November. But this is the point in time where it does station retrograde. Then more happily, a few days later, on September 12th, Jupiter stations direct in Capricorn. So Jupiter direct just kind of makes it's not a huge difference, but it does make Jupiter's opportunities and benefits and things like that, it bringing you sort of help to go even more smoothly or more directly or be expressed more obviously.
Right. And then later in the month, we have Saturn also stationing directing in the same sign in Capricorn.
Yeah, so it's interesting because this is so much activity in your 12th house of hidden things. So I'm sure this is going differently for different people. But in any case, Saturn stationing direct at the end of September, this will be the final push. We kind of said it's the final push once it went back into Capricorn at the beginning of July, but this is the last time it's both in Capricorn and then stationing direct to go forward and to move forward into new territory and eventually out of your 12th house. So this is the last stretch here from September through December.
Yeah, like July when it moved back into Capricorn was like the revisiting phase and coming back to something to deal with those issues again and revisit them. But this is the point where you actually start making forward momentum and probably have really started to wrap those things up in your life and perhaps resolve some of the issues that came up in terms of, like, let's say people you don't get along with or mental health issues or undermining yourself. And from this point forward, you're in the home stretch of that transit between late September and mid-December.
Yeah, definitely. And even though Mars will be retrograde for a while in the fall there, having both Jupiter and Saturn direct and going forward through your 12th house is really nice in terms of smoothing out, like you said, whatever you've been working on in that area of your life up to this point.
Right. All right. September, I guess those are the major transits for September. So that's going to take us into October.
Yeah, so October starts, there's a Pluto station early on October 4th, so that just intensifies further some of the same Capricorn 12th house themes we've been talking about for a while now. There is the last Mercury retrograde of the year that happens in mid-October. It stations retrograde in Scorpio, which is going to be your 10th house of career and public reputation, superiors, if you supervisors, if you have them, your boss, basically. Mercury goes retrograde mostly in Scorpio and then ends up dipping in a little bit to Libra before it stations direct in your 9th house of higher education, travel, religion, philosophy, things like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting about this Mercury retrograde in your 10th house is that when it initially stations retrograde, it stations in opposition to Uranus around 11 degrees of Scorpio, opposing Uranus at, I think, 9 degrees of Taurus. So there may be some like unexpected situation that arises in the sphere that has to do with your career. And it forces you to go through a period of like rethinking and revisioning what you're doing in that area of your life. Then eventually, Mercury retrogrades back into Libra and stations direct in that sign.
Yeah, and the Mercury retrograde through your 10th house of career, opposing Uranus in your 4th, can be some interaction involving something unexpected coming up with regard to your home sphere. So you suddenly need to move, or your parents suddenly need help, or something like that.
Oh yeah, so maybe it's like a change in the job sphere that prompts a unexpected change in the home sphere.
Either way, I mean, I think I could see it going either way.
Okay.
Yeah. So in any case, Mercury retrogrades aren't huge. They do happen just for a few weeks for every time, unless that's particularly activated for you by timing for some reason this year, in which case it might be a more important transit. But otherwise, it's pretty temporary, just for a few weeks here. Then it stations direct in Libra. When it does station direct around November 3rd, it stations square Saturn, pretty close to exact. And so that's just something to be aware of. I'm trying to think of, with Mercury stationing direct in the 9th house, square Saturn in the 12th, one possible thing that overlaps those two can be places abroad, because while the 9th house is usually the main house of long distance travel and things that are foreign to you, the 12th house can sometimes have some of those meanings, like being away from home.
Travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Travel, interaction with foreign places and foreign people or foreign cultures. Yeah, and that having some sort of impact on your educational, like what you know about the world.
And for some people, I guess a final thing with the Mercury retrograde overlapping your 10th house of career and 9th house could be something regarding your career leading you to think you need some more education or something like that, because the 9th house is an educational house as well. So, and that is one easy connection between those two.
Yeah, I could definitely see that prompting needing to go back and take some sort of course or do some educational program that's somehow tied into one's career. Like, what is the term for that? Like further education or
Continuing education.
continuing education?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So did we hit, I think we hit everything in October, right?
Yes,
The main things.
that's taking us through to,
November?
so Mercury retrogrades on the 27th of October back into Libra, and then it already stations direct in Libra by the 3rd of November. Just a week later, we have Mars stationing direct at 15 degrees of Aries and ending the Mars retrograde cycle.
Yeah. So that's, I was going to say a welcome sigh of relief. Mars isn't really about sighing. It's more about action. But anyway,
A welcome cry of relief.
a welcome war cry of relief,
Right.
something like that. Well, so Mars stationing direct is welcome, however we put it, because while things won't get moving quickly at first, because Mars takes a while to pick up speed again. So you won't get everything ironed out right away once it goes direct, but you will get a sense of forward motion to eventually clear up whatever you've been having to go back over for the past couple months. In the area in particular of siblings, neighbors, your neighborhood, your short distance traveling, and so forth, and communication. So, and it again, since Mars is stationing, I would say while this is welcome compared to the retrograde station, it still is a time where it's intensifying Mars things. So you still want to be careful about overly aggressive speech or things like that in interacting with others. I would say anyone else, but particularly so like those siblings or other relatives, if that is applicable for you. I'm trying to think what else about this.
Yeah, or overly aggressive driving or movement in general.
Yeah.
Especially if you have placements around 15 degrees of the cardinal signs, which would be 15 Aries, 15 Cancer, 15 Libra, or 15 Capricorn, just because it's like you've got that travel and movement axis, which is the 3rd and 9th, as well as a communication versus wisdom axis in those two houses. But then you've also got the health or illness and accidents and enemies axis there with the 6th and 12th. So you still want to be careful, even though Mars now is going to have forward movement, and there should be this sense of like getting out of being bogged down by being stuck in this one area or having this intense energy in this certain sector of your chart for several months, for almost 6 months. There's still, if you have personal placements in the middle of the cardinal signs, potential for the intensification of that energy, which can sometimes be stressful or can sometimes indicate like conflict or strife.
Definitely. And if you have been feeling more lethargic, like a lot of people do when Mars is retrograde for a while, your energy should start picking back up to, just more generally speaking, to take action on whatever you need to in that area of your life.
Right. So that's happening when Mars stations around the 13th of November. And then later in the month, we start moving into eclipse season again. And we get a lunar eclipse that happens in Gemini on the 30th of November, which is followed 2 weeks later by a solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th of December.
Yeah, so by the end of the year here, we've really fully moved into that Gemini-Sagittarius axis, which for you is that 5th house of children, sexuality, entertainment, and artistic expression, things you do for fun. That's one eclipse area for you. And then the 11th house being friends, groups, and associations for Sagittarius. So here with the Gemini one at the end of November, this is sort of a mini culmination potentially with regard to any of those 5th house topics I mentioned first. So this is an ongoing story. This isn't the last we'll hear of it, because there will be more eclipses there in Gemini and Sagittarius in the following year. But this is the first time that the full pair is happening near the end of the year here.
Yeah, so something that was initiated 6 months earlier maybe starts to come to fruition in this area of your life. So, because we're talking about a lunar eclipse here, right?
Right.
So a lunar eclipse in the 5th house. So for some people, one of the funny 5th house things that sometimes comes up is like hobbies or that which you do for fun. And sometimes a hobby can become more important in your life. Something that like started as a side thing becomes a more serious thing in your life at this point. So maybe 6 months earlier, you started trying out something new over the summer, but then it turns into something that you're more serious about or starts having a more major impact on your life at this point in time.
Yeah, definitely.
It can also be something pertaining to children, whether you have children or just the general topic of children in your life becoming more important or having a spotlight shed on it at this point in your life, or the topics surrounding sex and sexuality becoming more important to you at this point, and just taking more focus in your life at this time.
For sure. If you haven't been dating for a while, that can be an area that just becomes more important again for a bit. That's something that also goes into the 5th house. Or creative expression, like you said, sometimes people will have things like that in their lives, but they don't stay uniformly focused on it if it's not like their main career, but it's something that they still like. And so sometimes when there's things like eclipses happening in your 5th house, you can have projects come up where you're like, oh, I'd like to do that again, actually, for a while.
Sure. So the other side of that is the solar eclipse in Sagittarius in the 11th house of friends and groups on the 14th of December, and laying some sort of new foundation or planting the seeds for something that will grow and develop in that area of your life over the course of the next 6 months until they eventually reach sort of period of fruition and becoming more clear. It may be something that starts off subtly or almost imperceptibly in terms of a new phase in your life with respect to friends and groups at this time. But whatever you initiate at this time in that area will probably end up having a greater impact or becoming more important in the long term than it might seem at first.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And honestly, this one, which we've had the first one up in the summer, so this is the second one, but the first one in the full series where they're both happening is probably going to be a breath of fresh air for you in some respects, because there's been so many Capricorn transits going through your 12th house of seclusion. And so even though many people's lives do not allow them to fully seclude themselves, I can imagine that a lot of you with Aquarius rising have had some element of that, where you've been either feeling more withdrawn internally or actually externally, like withdrawing yourself from more social situations compared to average.
Yeah, this definitely seems more fun and more lightning by shifting the emphasis to like the fun axis of the chart, which is the 5th and 11th houses.
Yeah, definitely. Because both of those can be fun or social or both. And not just that, but it's also an air sign and a fire sign compared to so much Capricorn earth energy we've had this year. So I think this will be a lightening up. You can kind of get out and socialize a little bit more. And that will be an ongoing story that takes you into 2021.
Brilliant. All right. That takes us to the last major and perhaps the most notable astronomical event of the entirety of 2020, which is Saturn completes its 3-year transit through Capricorn and moves into Aquarius on the 17th of December, where it will stay for the next couple of years. And then Jupiter, just 2 days later on the 19th of December, also moves into Aquarius, where very quickly it will form a conjunction with Saturn on the 21st of December, and that conjunction only takes place once every 20 years. So it's kind of a notable or momentous astronomical alignment from both an astronomical and an astrological perspective.
Definitely. So Saturn going back into Aquarius means going back into your first house of self, body, and mind. And that is the area that we did have the little bit of preview of in the spring from late March to July 1st. And so this is now, you hopefully got an idea in the spring of what this might feel like or be about for you in terms of restructuring your identity, your sense of yourself, anything about your appearance, even health matters, or just restructuring something more major about your life as a whole, since the first house is so primary to your life. So Saturn will be going there transiting there from December 2020 for a good about 2.5 years from that point forward. Really nice for you, though. Jupiter joins it at the same time, which doesn't happen most of the time with Saturn transits. And so Jupiter going into your first is kind of the opposite. It's an energy of expansion, opportunity, buoyancy. You usually feel more optimistic when Jupiter is going through your first. You do want to be careful, although it won't be probably a huge thing with both Jupiter and Saturn there. Often it's said when Jupiter goes through there alone, you want to be careful of not overdoing things, particularly like expanding your body, basically overeating and over partying or things like that, because Jupiter is a very jovial influence oftentimes. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but it probably won't be as much of an issue for you because you'll have Saturn counterbalancing it at the same time.
Yeah, it's really nice and really unique having both of those planets going in at the same time because they're such polar opposite planets, but in doing so, that probably is going to help to achieve balance and equilibrium between the desire to expand versus the desire to contract over the course of the next year in 2021. So there'll be some areas where you'll be wanting to focus on getting more structured and doing a better job of like pulling things together, both in terms of your physical vitality, but also in terms of your mental vitality. And perhaps, just integrating better structures in that area of your life and cutting some things out or removing and rejecting some things, but then also with the Jupiter transit at the same time incorporating and expanding in other areas instead of contracting. Just giving you a better overall sense of like growth and optimism instead of just a super heavy Saturn transit, which on its own can sometimes be kind of overbearing or depressing.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's really quite nice that both of them are entering there at once in mid-December. It's kind of like measured growth or considered growth, which I think is a good balance of, being careful and responsible, but also optimistic and taking opportunities as they arise.
Yeah, let me just throw the chart up for that conjunction because it's so cool seeing it happen at the very beginning of Aquarius in the rising sign for those with Aquarius rising, and therefore could be much more personally important for those with Aquarius rising compared to other rising signs.
Mm-hmm.
It's not every, I don't even know when the last one was. The last Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was in Taurus, but I guess it's been something like 800 or 900 years since the last set of conjunctions in air signs. So nobody's seen a conjunction like this in their lifetime unless there's some like immortal that's like walking around that's seen all
Right.
of them or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, have you, is that?
No.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Yeah, so this will, I keep saying breath of fresh air. This will actually be like that because it's in an air sign in your first house. So it really is a nice movement, really for all of us with Jupiter and Saturn moving into an air sign versus a heavy, the heavy earth sign of Capricorn, but in particular because that's the air sign, that's the rising sign for you. So I'm sure that many of you with Aquarius rising are going to feel quite a bit better at the end of the year compared to whatever you're still kind of trying to work on before that point.
Sure. I mean, there will be still some challenges. I mean, I don't want to undersell like a Saturn transit through the first house.
For sure.
Which certainly can raise some obstacles with respect to health matters or bodily matters or one's appearance or even one's character traits and how you present yourself to the world.
Yeah.
As well as sometimes, because whenever Saturn goes into the first house or any of the angular houses, it also activates all of the other angular houses. So sometimes when there's greater emphasis on the first house of self, it can cause or be the result of tensions that are happening in the seventh house of relationships. It can also be connected with tensions that start surfacing with the home and family and living situation, as well as the 10th house of career. So it's kind of, there's going to be stuff coming up in all of those areas, but it's definitely more moderate for those with Aquarius rising compared to how it could be, just because Jupiter is there at the same time, bringing a little bit more optimism than there would be otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. All of that. It's a good caveat because we're being so optimistic about that combination just in comparison to having Saturn there alone. But it's not to say you only have Jupiter there alone either. It's both. So you will still need to do some, work, potentially restructuring your sense of self or what you're doing in the world. And, that can be pretty major, but Jupiter is going to help out. And so you have that to kind of be thankful for compared to perhaps another rising sign.
Yeah. I mean, one of the pieces of advice is just to take care of yourself. And that'll be one of the goals of that transit is figuring out how to take care of yourself. All right. I think that brings us to the end of 2020 because we're already like getting into like major transits that are really going to be dominating 2021. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here a little bit. And we might have to save the rest of that discussion for next time.
Yeah. You don't want to do the rest tonight?
I mean, we could. Okay. I don't know if my voice will cooperate.
Yeah, that's true.
And we still got to do Pisces rising if we can get to it at some point here.
Sounds good.
I feel bad about the Pisces risings.
I know, I do too. You've waited a long time.
All right. We'll see what we can do. We'll see if we can get to that tonight. Thanks a lot for joining me today to do these horoscopes for Aquarius and Aquarius rising. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thanks everybody in the live stream. I've been watching some of your comments and I really appreciate it. So thanks for joining us for the live stream. Please be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up. Also be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to see future videos. And if you're watching the recording afterwards, to post a comment just letting us know how some of these transits have been going for you over the past couple of years, or what things you're anticipating from 2020 coming up in the future. All right, we got a couple of things we got to mention before we wrap up for the day. One of them is that all of the artwork that I used in this episode actually comes from a set of calendar posters that I released for 2020. One of them is the planetary alignments poster, which shows all of the major ingresses and lunations and retrograde periods and everything else, so that you can see when exactly some of these transits that we talked about today will start during the course of the year at a glance. We also have the planetary movements poster that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and where they'll end up by the end, as well as a third bonus poster that shows the significations of the houses if you're still learning that element of astrology, which is so major. Additionally, Leisa and I just released the 2020 Auspicious Elections Full Year Ahead Electional Report a couple of weeks ago, where we went through and picked out some lucky dates during each of the next 12 months to use for beginning different types of ventures and undertakings.
Mm-hmm. So basically, if you want to plan further ahead in the year in 2020 for any important events you want to hold or projects you want to start or so forth, these are basically better dates and time ranges to do that versus other times in order for things to go better.
Yeah, so you can find out more information about that at chrisbrennanastrologer.com/2020 elections. And finally, we wouldn't be able to do any of this except for or without the support of all of the patrons who support us through our page on patreon.com. So in particular, shout out to patrons Christine Stone, Nate Craddock, and Tanner Robinson, as well as the AstroGold astrology app available at astrogold.io, the Portland School of Astrology at portlandastrology.org, the Honeycomb Collective Personal Astrological Almanacs at honeycomb.co. And then finally, there's two major astrology conferences happening in 2020. One of them is being hosted by the International Society for Astrological Research, which is hosting a conference in Denver, Colorado, September 10th through the 14th, 2020. More information about that at esar2020.org. And then also the Northwest Astrological Conference, which is happening in Seattle, May 21st through the 25th, 2020. More information about that at norwac.net. If you'd like to sign up to become a patron of the Astrology Podcast and get bonus content and other things like that, like early access to new episodes or private patron-only podcast episodes, you can find out more information at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. All right, I think that's it for this forecast. So thanks everyone for joining us, and good luck in 2020, and we'll see you again next year.
Have a great year.